The transport shuttle's doors hissed open with a sound that reminded Ji-Ho Kim of the morning tea kettle back in his Seoul apartment. He stepped onto the polished metal deck of Nexus Prime, the Galactic Confederation's crown jewel of a space station. The first thing that hit him wasn't the recycled air or the hum of massive generators. It was how absolutely enormous everything was. Ji-Ho stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, a perfectly average height back on Earth. Here, surrounded by the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, he felt like a child who had wandered into a convention of giants. The ceiling stretched impossibly high above him, designed to accommodate species that made human basketball players look short. The Zentari delegates dominated the nearest group, their insectoid bodies towering 12 feet into the air. 4 arms, each covered in chitinous armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. Their compound eyes tracked his movement as they clicked and chittered in their native language. Ji-Ho's universal translator, a small device nestled behind his ear, caught every word. "Look at this tiny creature," one of them said, gesturing with 2 of its 4 arms. "How did such fragile beings even manage to leave their planet? Their bones must be hollow like primitive flying creatures." Another Zentari joined the conversation, its mandibles clicking with what Ji-Ho recognized as amusement. Perhaps they were launched from their world by accident, a malfunction in their primitive propulsion systems. To his left, the Volak delegates hummed in harmonious frequencies that made the air itself seem to vibrate. These crystalline beings stood 8 feet tall, their translucent bodies catching and refracting the station's lighting into dancing rainbows across the walls. When they moved, they chimed like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Beautiful, but their size made Ji-Ho feel like he was walking through a forest of living glass towers. Even the supposedly compact Relian delegates, mammalian creatures covered in silver-gray fur, stood a full 7 feet tall. Their large ears twitched as they observed him, and Ji-Ho caught fragments of their whispered conversations about the small, soft beings from the outer rim. The space station itself was a marvel of engineering that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Massive transparent tubes carried hover trains filled with alien passengers between different sectors. Holographic advertisements in dozens of languages floated through the air, advertising everything from exotic foods to advanced starship components. Robotic maintenance drones, each one larger than Ji-Ho himself, glided silently overhead on anti-gravity platforms. As Ji-Ho made his way through the corridors toward the assembly chamber, he passed viewport after viewport, showing the vastness of space beyond. Sleek alien spacecraft docked at various levels of the station, some shaped like elegant crescents, others resembling crystalline spears or organic pods. A massive Volak crystal ship pulsed with internal light as it approached a docking bay, while a formation of Zentari vessels moved with military precision through the shipping lanes. The other delegates barely noticed him as he walked past. When they did, their reactions ranged from curious glances to barely concealed smirks. A group of tall, blue-skinned Altarians paused their conversation to stare down at him, their 4 eyes blinking in sequence as they tried to process what they were seeing. "Is that really the representative from the new species?" one of them asked in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "I heard they were small, but this is remarkable. How do they survive on a planet with such tiny inhabitants?" Ji-Ho adjusted his simple diplomatic robes, plain dark fabric that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate costumes and technological enhancements worn by other delegates. His clothing had been specifically chosen to appear non-threatening, but now he wondered if it made him look even more insignificant. The assembly chamber doors towered 30 feet high, decorated with symbols from every member species of the Confederation. As Ji-Ho approached, they slid open with a deep rumble that he felt in his chest. Inside, the chamber was even more impressive, a massive amphitheater with seating for thousands of delegates arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. That platform had obviously been modified for his visit. What was normally a raised dais 10 feet high had been awkwardly fitted with additional steps and a lower secondary platform. The modification was so obvious that several delegates pointed and whispered about it as Ji-Ho made his entrance. The Confederate Council members sat in elevated positions around the chamber's perimeter, their seats designed like thrones to emphasize their authority. Each one represented a different founding species of the Confederation, and each one looked down at Jiho with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely disguised contempt. As he climbed the modified steps to reach the speaking platform, Jiho could hear dozens of conversations happening simultaneously around the chamber. His translator picked up fragments in multiple languages, discussions about humanity's obvious physical limitations, debates about whether such small creatures could contribute anything meaningful to galactic civilization, and speculation about how Earth's inhabitants had even managed to develop space travel. The lead Zentari delegate, a particularly imposing female with battle scars across her carapace, leaned toward the Volak council member beside her. Her clicking speech carried clearly in the vast chamber. "I've reviewed their species files. They have no natural armor, no enhanced physical capabilities, no extraordinary sensory organs. How did natural selection produce such inadequate specimens?" Jiho reached the podium and looked out over the assembled representatives of 47 different star systems. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on him. The chamber's acoustics were designed to carry sound perfectly to every seat, which meant his voice would reach every delegate clearly. But it also meant that every whisper and dismissive comment would reach him just as clearly. The silence that fell over the chamber wasn't respectful anticipation. It was the quiet of beings waiting to be entertained by what they assumed would be a short, amusing presentation from a species that clearly didn't belong among the galaxy's great civilizations. Jiho smiled warmly and activated the chamber's central holographic display system. His movements were calm and confident, showing none of the intimidation that the assembled delegates clearly expected to see. "Distinguished representatives," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics, "I am honored to present humanity's case for full membership in this esteemed confederation." Jiho activated the chamber's holographic display system, and a beautiful blue-green sphere materialized above the speaking platform. Earth rotated slowly in the air, its swirling white clouds and deep blue oceans drawing appreciative murmurs from several delegates. It looked peaceful, almost garden-like from space. "Before we discuss humanity's contributions to the Confederation," Jiho said with a friendly smile, "perhaps I should tell you about my typical morning back home." The alien delegates settled back in their seats with polite interest. Several adjusted their translation devices, expecting to hear about some quaint domestic ritual from this small species. "I usually wake up around 6 in the morning in Seoul. That's one of our larger cities," Jiho began conversationally. "First thing I do is check the weather. Yesterday was particularly refreshing. A nice steady rain with some wind to keep things interesting." He spoke so casually that it took a moment for the implications to register. The Volak delegate's crystalline body began to flicker with nervous energy as her internal sensors processed what he'd just described as refreshing weather. The rain was coming down pretty steadily, Jiho continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension in the chamber. "About 4 centimeters per hour, with wind gusts around 45 kilometers per hour. Perfect jogging weather, really. I love how the rain feels on my skin during exercise." A Rylan delegate in the front row leaned forward, his large ears twitching. "You exercise in precipitation storms?" "Oh yes, it's quite invigorating," Jiho replied cheerfully. "Though I have to be careful not to slip on the wet pavement. Seoul can get pretty slick during monsoon season. That's when we get the really exciting weather. Sometimes winds up to 100 kilometers per hour. With rain so heavy, you can barely see 10 meters ahead." The lead Zentari delegate's compound eyes widened. Her species came from a desert world where the strongest winds barely reached 15 kilometers per hour. The idea of deliberately venturing outside during a storm was incomprehensible. "On weekends, I enjoy hiking with my friend Hyejin in the mountains near the city," Jiho continued, his tone remaining conversational and warm. "We visited Mount Halasan just last month. Such beautiful volcanic activity this time of year. The lava flows create these amazing patterns in the rock, and the sulfur vents make the air smell so distinctive." Several delegates exchanged alarmed glances. The Volak's crystalline structure was now flickering rapidly, creating prismatic light patterns across the chamber walls that indicated extreme agitation. "Volcanic activity?" clicked the Zentari delegate, her earlier condescension completely gone. "You recreate near-active geological instability." "Well, Halasan isn't one of our more active volcanoes," Jiho said with a modest shrug. "For real excitement, you'd want to visit Mount Sakurajima or Kilauea. My cousin Jamin works as a volcanologist. He actually goes inside active craters to collect samples. Amazing job, really. He's always posting pictures of lava lakes and pyroclastic flows on our social networks." The chamber was growing quieter as delegates began to realize that what they were hearing wasn't typical for most inhabited worlds. A robotic translation drone hovering near the Altarian delegation sparked and stuttered as it tried to process the concept of beings who voluntarily approached active volcanoes. "Of course, Earth's environment is quite dynamic," Jiho continued, pulling up atmospheric data on the holographic display. The peaceful image of Earth was replaced by swirling weather patterns, temperature maps showing extreme variations, and atmospheric composition charts. "We experience what we call seasons, regular climate variations that keep life interesting throughout the year." The data was staggering. Temperature swings of 40 degrees Celsius within a single day, storm systems that covered entire continents, hurricane formations with wind speeds that would shred most alien architecture. "In winter, my hometown regularly drops to negative 20 degrees Celsius, Jiho explained matter-of-factly. "Though my friend Bora, who lives up north, says that's nothing. Her city hits negative 40 on a regular basis. She still walks to her work every day, says the cold air is good for your lungs." A collective shudder ran through the Rylian delegation. Their homeworld maintained a steady 22 degrees Celsius year-round, and summers can be quite warm, Jiho added. "We often see temperatures above 35 degrees, with humidity levels that make the air thick enough to practically drink. Great weather for swimming, though you have to watch out for the UV radiation from our sun." He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed Earth's atmospheric composition in stark detail. "Our standard atmospheric pressure sits at 101.3 kilopascals, with an oxygen content of 21%. Gravity maintains a steady 9.8 meters per second, squared across the entire planet." An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The numbers were appearing on translation screens throughout the amphitheater, and delegates were frantically consulting their species databases to verify what they were seeing. The Rylian delegate Silver Fur was literally standing on end as his nervous system processed the implications. Most Confederation species had evolved under 0.4 G gravity, with atmospheric pressures that barely registered on human measurement scales. The idea of living under nearly 10 meters per second, squared of constant gravitational force, was terrifying. "Your species lives in those conditions?" the lead Zentari delegate asked, her clicking speech now carrying notes of what could only be described as concern. "All the time." "Oh, that's just standard," Jiho replied, with the same cheerful tone he might use to discuss the weather. "Though, I should mention that my colleague Minsu comes from the coastal regions, where they get the really interesting weather patterns." He pulled up a new display showing a typhoon system approaching the Korean peninsula, its spiral arms stretching across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Wind speeds in the center exceeded 200 kilometers per hour. "Typhoon season is always exciting," Jiho said fondly. "Minsu sends me videos every year of the waves crashing against the seawalls in Busan. Sometimes they're 30 meters high. Absolutely spectacular. His family runs a restaurant right on the waterfront, and they only close during the really big storms." The Volok delegate's harmonic humming had become discordant with stress. Her species' crystal cities would shatter under the atmospheric pressure changes that humans considered normal weather fluctuations. "The mountain regions are beautiful too," Jiho continued, seemingly unaware of the growing alarm in his audience. "My brother Dongwook works as a rescue coordinator in the Himalayas, helping people who get into trouble while climbing the high peaks. He operates at altitudes where the atmospheric pressure drops to about 30% of sea level. Says the view is worth the oxygen deprivation." A small maintenance robot working on the chamber's lighting system suddenly stopped functioning and dropped from the ceiling, its circuits apparently overloaded by the translation data it was processing. The metallic clang as it hit the floor seemed to echo the shock reverberating through the assembled delegates. "Oxygen deprivation?" wheezed an Altarian delegate through his breathing apparatus. "Well, humans are pretty adaptable," Jiho said with obvious pride. "We've learned to function in all sorts of environments. My sister Yun Young is a deep-sea researcher. She works at depths where the water pressure would crush most surface structures. And my neighbor Kyung-ho just got back from Antarctica, where he spent 6 months studying ice formations in temperatures that would freeze most liquids solid." The holographic display now showed images of humans working in environments that looked like alien hellscapes to most of the assembled delegates. Figures in protective suits walking across volcanic fields, divers swimming in crushing ocean depths, mountaineers scaling peaks in howling blizzards. "The remarkable thing is," Jiho said, his voice filled with genuine affection for his homeworld, "most humans don't think of Earth as particularly challenging. It's just home." The holographic display above Jiho shifted dramatically, replacing the scenic views of Earth with detailed anatomical scans that made several delegates lean back in their seats. A three-dimensional human skeleton rotated slowly in the air, each bone highlighted with density measurements that seemed to defy biological possibility. "Now let me show you how humans actually function," Jiho said, his tone shifting to something more clinical and precise. "These are standard physiological specifications for our species." The Zentari delegate's forearms twitched nervously as she watched the bone density readings appear in real-time translation across her visual display. Her own exoskeleton, while impressive-looking, was designed more for intimidation than actual structural support in high-gravity environments. "Human bone structure evolved to withstand regular impacts and stress loads in our gravitational environment," Jiho explained, highlighting different sections of the skeleton. "Our average skeletal density is 1.9 grams per cubic centimeter, roughly 3 times denser than most spacefaring species." The Volak delegate's crystalline body began resonating at an unstable frequency, creating a low harmonic whine that filled her section of the chamber. Her own crystal matrix was elegant and beautiful, but it could barely maintain structural integrity under 0.3 G conditions. The idea of bones dense enough to function under Earth's crushing gravity was terrifying. A maintenance drone working on the chamber's lighting system suddenly paused in its work, its sensors apparently overwhelmed by the data being transmitted. Through the station's networks, the small robot's optical array focused on the holographic display before it quietly retreated to a safer distance. "These bones aren't just dense," Jiho continued, zooming in on a cross-section of a human femur. "They're designed to flex and absorb impact energy. When humans fall, which happens regularly during childhood as we learn to navigate our environment, these bones can withstand forces that would shatter most biological structures." He pulled up a video feed from Earth, showing children playing in what appeared to be a recreational area. The assembled delegates watched in growing horror as small humans deliberately launched themselves from elevated platforms, crashed into each other during games, and bounced back up apparently uninjured. "Human children actually strengthen their bones through controlled impact activities," Jiho noted with obvious fondness. "What we call play is essentially repeated stress testing of our structural systems." The Rillian delegate's silver fur was now standing completely on end, making him look twice his normal size. His species' young were kept in carefully padded environments for their first several years, specifically to prevent the kind of bone damage that human children seem to seek out for entertainment. The holographic display shifted to show human musculature with detailed fiber composition analysis that made the chamber's automatic translation systems stutter and spark. The data was simply too far outside normal biological parameters for most alien databases to process effectively. "Our muscular system developed to support rapid movement and endurance in Earth's challenging environment," Jiho explained, highlighting different muscle groups. "A typical human can survive acceleration forces up to 9G with proper preparation, though my friend Taiwan from the military says they regularly train for much higher tolerances." The lead Zentari delegate's compound eyes were now focused entirely on her personal data display, frantically cross-referencing the information with her species' own physical capabilities. Her people could barely function above 3G acceleration, and that was with full mechanical support systems. Taewon is part of our aerospace program, Ji-ho continued conversationally. He pilots what we call fighter aircraft, vehicles that regularly perform maneuvers generating forces that would render most species unconscious. He says the real challenge isn't the G-forces, it's staying alert during extended high-stress operations. A new holographic display appeared, showing microscopic imagery that made several delegates instinctively recoil. Human immune system activity played out in real time, white blood cells aggressively hunting and destroying microscopic threats with an efficiency that looked more like military combat than biological processes. Earth's biosphere required us to develop what you might call robust defensive mechanisms, Ji-ho noted, his voice taking on an almost casual tone that made the information somehow more disturbing. Our immune systems actively combat thousands of potential threats every single day. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, and various environmental toxins that occur naturally in our habitat. The Zentari delegate was now frantically consulting her species' medical database through her neural interface, her clicking speech rapid and agitated as she communicated with her homeworld's xenobiology experts. The data streaming across her display showed pathogen loads that would cause complete systemic collapse in her population within hours. Most humans aren't even aware this is happening, Ji-ho added cheerfully. It's just background biological activity. Though when our immune systems do encounter something particularly challenging, we might feel slightly tired for a day or two, while our bodies ramp up production of defensive agents. A small service robot that had been quietly cleaning the chamber floor suddenly stopped and backed away from the speaking platform, its sensors apparently registering the holographic biological data as some kind of threat. The machine's optical array flickered nervously as it retreated to what its programming calculated as a safer distance. The display shifted again, this time showing Earth's sun in all its blazing glory, with radiation measurements that made the chamber's environmental systems automatically increase shielding in several sections. Oh, and our sun produces quite a bit of radiation, Ji-ho mentioned almost as an afterthought, as if discussing the weather. We've adapted to function under constant exposure to energy levels that most species would consider immediately lethal, the BIs. Numbers appearing on the display were staggering. UV radiation levels that would cause cellular breakdown in most galactic species, cosmic ray exposure that required heavy shielding for most space travelers, and electromagnetic radiation across spectrums that most civilizations went to great lengths to avoid. My sister So-young works as a solar technician, Ji-ho said with obvious pride. She spends 8 to 10 hours every day in direct sunlight, maintaining solar collection arrays for our cities. Says she loves the job because she gets to work outdoors. She actually gets restless when she has to work inside for extended periods. The Volak delegate's harmonic resonance had become completely erratic, creating discordant sound patterns that her neighbors found disturbing. Her crystalline structure was designed to filter and process specific light frequencies. The broad-spectrum radiation that humans lived under daily would overload and shatter her matrix within minutes. Humans actually require exposure to our sun's radiation for proper biological function, Ji-ho continued, apparently oblivious to the growing alarm around him. We synthesize essential nutrients through radiation absorption and psychological. Studies show that insufficient sun exposure leads to mood disorders. A cargo-loading robot working in an adjacent docking bay suddenly malfunctioned, its arms seizing up as its processing systems tried to handle the translation data being broadcast throughout the station. The mechanical failure sent crash carts of supplies tumbling across the bay, though the noise was barely audible through the chamber's sound dampening. The remarkable thing, Ji-ho said, looking out over the assembled delegates with genuine warmth, is that most humans consider Earth a relatively gentle, nurturing environment. We've developed art, music, literature, and philosophy while living in conditions that your species would classify as a Class 12 extinction-level habitat. The chamber had fallen into complete silence, except for the increasingly unstable harmonic resonance of the Volak delegate and the nervous clicking of Zentari mandibles. Even the chamber's environmental systems seemed to be running more quietly, as if the station itself was trying not to draw attention. The holographic display now showed a simple comparison chart, human biological specifications alongside the known parameters for every major Confederation species. The differences weren't just significant, they were so extreme that several delegates were beginning to question whether the data could possibly be accurate. Earth wasn't just another inhabited world. It was a death trap that had somehow produced a species capable of thriving in conditions that would annihilate most galactic civilizations, and they did it while developing advanced technology, complex societies, and apparently a cheerful disposition about the whole experience. The chamber's atmosphere grew thick with tension as the lead Zentari delegate's clicking speech carried a new note of wariness that hadn't been there before. Her forearms gestured more carefully now, and her compound eyes remained fixed on Jiho with what could only be described as newfound respect mixed with concern. "Perhaps," she clicked, her tone now noticeably less mocking than it had been at the start of the session, "the human representative could demonstrate these adaptations you've described." Jiho's smile remained warm and friendly, the same expression he might wear while greeting neighbors back in Seoul. "Of course I'd be happy to. Though I should mention up front that I'm considered quite average by human standards. Nothing special at all, really." Several delegates exchanged glances at this casual disclaimer. If Jiho represented average human capabilities, what did that say about the rest of his species? The first thing Jiho did was reach up to his collar and begin disconnecting his environmental suit's supplementary systems. The soft hiss of disengaging life support made every alien in the chamber instinctively check their own breathing apparatus. What he was doing was unthinkable. No delegate had ever removed their environmental support while in the chamber. "The station's atmosphere is actually more comfortable for me without the supplementary oxygen," Jiho explained, as he folded the breathing apparatus neatly and set it aside. "Earth's air has a higher oxygen concentration than what you've designed. Here is a compromise between species." He took a deep, satisfied breath that made the Rillian delegates' ears flatten against their heads in alarm. Several aliens immediately activated their emergency oxygen supplies just from watching him breathe the station's standard atmosphere unassisted. A maintenance robot working on the chamber's environmental controls suddenly stopped its routine calibrations. Its sensors were registering that a biological entity was functioning normally in atmospheric conditions that should have required immediate medical intervention for any known species. The Volak delegate, her crystalline body still flickering with nervous energy, decided to test the human's claims more directly. She gestured to one of the chamber's ceremonial objects, a dense metal sphere used for formal voting procedures. The sphere was crafted from compressed titanium steel alloy and weighed nearly 30 kilograms. Most delegates required mechanical assistance or multiple team members to move it. With a sound like wind chimes in a storm, she used her crystalline appendages to roll the sphere across the polished floor toward Jiho. It moved slowly, its weight making the floor vibrate slightly with each rotation. Jiho watched it approach with casual interest, then simply reached down and caught it one-handed as it bumped against the speaking platform. The sphere's momentum, which should have been enough to knock down most biological entities, was absorbed so easily that he barely shifted his balance. "Nice craftsmanship," he commented, examining the sphere's surface with genuine appreciation. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he tossed it back toward the Volak delegate with a gentle underhand motion. The sphere sailed through the air in a perfect arc, its 30-kilogram mass moving as if it weighed no more than a child's toy. The Volak delegate had to quickly reinforce her crystalline structure and called 2 assistants to help catch it safely. Whispers rippled through the assembly like water through a disturbed pond. The casual display of grip strength and reflexes was beyond anything most species could achieve, even with mechanical enhancement. Human reaction time averages about 190 milliseconds for basic responses, Jiho explained conversationally, as if he hadn't just demonstrated capabilities that defied most delegates' understanding of biology. "Though my friend Dong Hyun from our athletics program is much faster. He competes in what we call combat sports." The Rillian delegate's large ears twitched nervously. "Combat sports?" Recreational activities where humans attempt to physically overcome each other for entertainment, Jiho clarified with obvious enthusiasm. Boxing, wrestling, martial arts, mixed fighting competitions. We have hundreds of different variations. Donghyun specializes in full-contact fighting, says it's great exercise and helps him stay sharp. The Rillian delegate's silver fur was now standing completely on end, making him look like he'd been struck by lightning. His species had eliminated all forms of physical conflict thousands of years ago, considering it too dangerous for civilized beings. Your species fights for entertainment? The delegate asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Oh yes, it's very popular, Jiho replied cheerfully. We also enjoy jumping from aircraft with fabric parachutes, diving to crushing ocean depths just to see what's down there, and climbing mountains in sub-zero temperatures for the challenge. My cousin Eugene just returned from what we call extreme mountaineering. As he spoke, Jiho absently picked up a metal stylus from the podium, a writing instrument made from hardened alloy, designed to last for decades of regular use. Without seeming to notice what he was doing, he bent it into a perfect right angle while discussing his cousin's adventures. Eugene spent 3 weeks above the death zone on Mount Everest, he continued. The metal stylus now twisted into an artistic spiral in his hands. That's at altitudes where the atmospheric pressure and oxygen levels would be instantly fatal to most life forms. She was documenting ice crystal formations for a research project. Said the biggest challenge wasn't the environment. It was carrying enough camera equipment to get good photos. Several delegates were now staring at the twisted metal in Jiho's hands. The stylus had been designed to resist deformation under normal use for decades. He'd reshaped it like soft clay while talking about weekend recreation. A security robot stationed near the chamber entrance began running extended sensor sweeps, its programming struggling to classify what it was observing. The machine's optical array zoomed in on Jiho's hands, recording the casual manipulation of materials that should have required industrial equipment. The ship that brought me here, Jiho continued, setting the artistically twisted stylus back on the podium, was built to withstand Earth's launch conditions. What we consider gentle departure protocols involve acceleration forces and atmospheric friction that would tear apart most vessels in your current fleets. Through the chamber's massive viewports, delegates could see Jiho's transport ship docked at a nearby berth. It looked remarkably simple compared to most alien vessels. No exotic curves, no crystalline matrices, no obvious anti-grav generators. Just a basic metallic hull with simple geometric lines. That's a standard civilian transport, Jiho noted, following their gaze. Nothing military-grade or specially reinforced. My pilot Jong-soo says it's actually pretty comfortable compared to some of the older models he's flown. The current generation has much better shock absorption for atmospheric entry. The Zentari delegate was now frantically accessing her ship's external sensors to scan the human vessel. The readings that came back made her mandibles click with disbelief. The hull plating was dense enough to serve as armor on her species' warships. The engine systems were designed to operate under thrust loads that would crush most alien propulsion systems. Jong-soo is actually a civilian cargo pilot, Jiho added conversationally. He delivers supplies to our research stations in hazardous environments. Places like active volcanic zones, deep ocean platforms, and polar research facilities. Says the job keeps him busy because humans are always building facilities in locations other species consider uninhabitable. A small service drone that had been polishing the chamber's ceremonial fixtures suddenly stopped working and backed away from the human delegation's seating area. Its simple programming had classified the entire zone as potentially dangerous, based on the data it was receiving through the station's networks. The remarkable thing about Jong-soo, Jiho continued with obvious pride, is that he's completely self-taught. Learned to fly by practicing in Earth's atmosphere, where a single mistake means dealing with gravitational forces and weather systems that don't give second chances. He says it makes interstellar navigation feel relaxing by comparison. The chamber had fallen into an almost reverent silence. What they were witnessing wasn't just a species that had survived on a hostile world. It was a civilization that had thrived there so completely that they considered their death world environment normal comfortable, even recreational. The twisted metal stylus on the podium caught the light from the holographic displays, its impossible curves serving as a small but undeniable reminder that everything they thought they knew about biological limitations might need to be reconsidered. The Confederate Council chamber had never been so quiet, not even during the great trade wars or the territorial disputes that had shaped galactic politics for centuries. The silence was complete, profound and heavy with the weight of realization. Every delegate, from the towering Zentari to the crystalline Volak, sat motionless as the implications of what they'd just witnessed settled into their consciousness like sediment in still water. Jiho stood calmly at the podium, his twisted metal stylus still gleaming under the chamber's lights, a small monument to casual strength that no one could ignore. The holographic display of Earth continued to rotate peacefully above him, its blue-green surface now seeming less like a garden world and more like a forge where an impossible species had been hammered into existence. "Distinguished representatives," Jiho said, and his voice seemed to carry a new weight that hadn't been there when he'd first introduced himself. The casual friendliness was still present, but underneath it lay something else, the quiet confidence of someone who had just revealed that his entire species existed on a level that most of the galaxy couldn't even comprehend. "Humanity seeks membership in the Confederation not because we need protection," he continued, his words measured and clear, "but because we believe we can offer unique capabilities that might benefit our potential allies and partners." The holographic display shifted dramatically, showing a three-dimensional star chart that encompassed dozens of solar systems within Confederation space. Scattered throughout the map were worlds marked with warning symbols, bright red indicators that designated them as uninhabitable, hazardous, or too dangerous for colonization efforts. These worlds, Jiho gestured to the glowing red markers, the ones your species have classified as too dangerous for settlement or resource extraction, represent significant expansion opportunities for humanity. The numbers were staggering. 73 worlds marked as high-radiation death traps, 41 planets with crushing gravity that would flatten most alien structures, 28 worlds with toxic atmospheres that would dissolve most known materials, dozens more with combinations of environmental hazards that had kept them off-limits to galactic civilization for millennia. A maintenance robot working on the chamber's ceiling fixtures suddenly stopped and descended to floor level. Its sensors, apparently drawn by the data being transmitted through the station's networks. The machine's optical array focused on the star chart, recording information that its programming suggested might be strategically important. "We can establish research stations on high-radiation planets," Jiho explained matter-of-factly, highlighting several worlds that glowed angry red on the display. "Our physiology handles radiation exposure that would be immediately lethal to most species. These worlds could provide access to rare elements and energy sources that are currently impossible to obtain safely." The lead Zentari delegate leaned forward in her elevated seat, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic star chart. "Your species would actually volunteer for colonization missions to radiation-soaked worlds." "We'd consider it exciting," Jiho replied with genuine enthusiasm. "In fact, several of our scientists have already expressed interest in studying what you call impossible stellar phenomena up close. My colleague Dr. Chan Wu has spent the last 5 years developing equipment to study the interior dynamics of active stars. He's always wanted to get closer to his subject matter." The Volak delegate's crystalline structure resonated with frequencies that sounded almost like musical notes, a sign of deep contemplation in her species. "You would approach active stellar bodies?" "Well, not without proper equipment," Jiho said with a modest laugh. "But yes, we have theoretical proposals for solar observation platforms that could operate within a star's corona. The engineering challenges are fascinating." The star chart zoomed in on a cluster of worlds marked with multiple hazard indicators: crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, seismic instability, and radiation bombardment. "Mining operations in crushing gravity wells present interesting logistical challenges," Jiho continued, "but nothing insurmountable. These worlds often contain the heaviest elements in concentrated deposits that are impossible to find in gentler environments. My engineer friend Yunji has already designed extraction platforms that could operate under 10 times standard galactic gravity. Several delegates were now frantically consulting their personal data systems, cross-referencing the worlds Jiho was casually discussing with their own species' exploration records. The files were uniformly marked with warnings that made exploration attempts inadvisable for any known life form. A security drone patrolling the chamber's perimeter suddenly altered its route, moving closer to the speaking platform. Its advanced sensors were detecting conversation topics that triggered protocols designed to monitor discussions of strategic military importance. Exploration bases in toxic atmospheres are actually some of our more straightforward projects, Jiho added conversationally. We have several proposals for worlds with sulfuric acid atmospheres, methane storms, and corrosive environmental conditions. These locations often harbor unique chemical processes that could revolutionize manufacturing techniques. The Rilian delegate's voice was barely audible when he asked, "Your species would volunteer for first contact missions with hostile civilizations?" Jiho's smile became even warmer. "We'd consider it an honor to serve the Confederation in that capacity. Humans have extensive experience with challenging negotiations, though I should clarify something important." He paused, and the silence in the chamber seemed to deepen even further. "Earth is actually quite mild by our standards for habitability." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Several aliens began double-checking their translation systems, certain they must have misunderstood. "We've already conducted preliminary surveys of Confederation space," Jiho continued, pulling up a new display that showed 17 worlds scattered across the galaxy. "These planets would make excellent human colonies. What your species consider lethal environmental conditions, we find refreshing." The 17 worlds on the display were among the most feared destinations in known space, planets that had claimed entire exploration fleets, worlds where the environment was so hostile that they were used as cautionary tales about the dangers of uncontrolled expansion. "My colleague Inho leads our xenobiology department," Jiho said with obvious pride. "He's particularly excited about studying life forms that exist in what you consider impossible conditions. He believes that organisms adapted to extreme environments might hold keys to biological advances that could benefit all species." A cargo-handling robot in the adjacent docking bay suddenly malfunctioned, its load-balancing systems apparently overwhelmed by the translation data streaming through the station's computer networks. The mechanical failure sent shipping containers tumbling across the bay floor with crashes that echoed through the station's corridors. "Our engineer Yunji has developed preliminary designs for space stations that could operate in environments where no current Confederation technology can function," Jiho continued, seemingly unaware of the mechanical chaos his words were causing. "Throughout the station, plasma storm regions, gravitational anomaly zones, areas of space-time distortion that have been considered permanently inaccessible." The Volic delegate's harmonic resonance had shifted to frequencies that her species associated with religious awe. "How did your species develop civilization on such a hostile world?" Jiho's expression became gentle, almost paternal. "We didn't see it as hostile. We saw it as home." The simple statement carried more impact than all the technical specifications and demonstrations combined. It revealed something fundamental about humanity that the assembled delegates were only beginning to understand. They weren't survivors who had somehow escaped their world's hostility. They were beings who had embraced that hostility and made it part of themselves. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not a single delegate opposed humanity's full membership in the Confederation. The Chamber's automated systems recorded the decision with electronic precision, but the real transformation couldn't be captured in data files. Before Jiho had even powered down his presentation equipment, his personal communication device was chiming with incoming messages. 17 different species had submitted formal requests for human assistance with exploration and colonization projects that had been considered impossible for decades. The Zentari wanted human scouts for first contact missions in the galactic rim territories. The Volak requested human engineers for construction projects in radiation-soaked asteroid fields. The Rillian delegation asked for human researchers to investigate worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable centuries ago. Later, that evening, in his modest quarters aboard the station, Jiho compiled his report for transmission back to Earth. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic keyboard as he summarized the day's events for his government and the billions of humans who would soon learn that their species had just become the galaxy's go-to solution for impossible problems. Humanity's initial reputation as small, fragile beings has been successfully revised, he wrote with satisfaction. Current galactic perception has evolved to something closer to diplomatically inclined apex predators with a cheerful disposition about extreme challenges. He paused in his typing to look out through his quarters viewport at the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Somewhere out there were worlds that the galaxy's greatest civilizations feared to approach, worlds that would soon carry human footprints and the sound of human laughter as his species turned the impossible into the routine. The transformation was complete. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The end. Mining operations in crushing gravity wells present interesting logistical challenges, Jiho continued, but nothing insurmountable. These worlds often contain the heaviest elements in concentrated deposits that are impossible to find in gentler environments. My engineer friend Yunji has already designed extraction platforms that could operate under 10 times standard galactic gravity. Several delegates were now frantically consulting their personal data systems, cross-referencing the worlds Jiho was casually discussing with their own species' exploration records. The files were uniformly marked with warnings that made exploration attempts inadvisable for any known life form. A security drone patrolling the chamber's perimeter suddenly altered its route, moving closer to the speaking platform. Its advanced sensors were detecting conversation topics that triggered protocols designed to monitor discussions of strategic military importance. Exploration bases in toxic atmospheres are actually some of our more straightforward projects, Jiho added conversationally. We have several proposals for worlds with sulfuric acid atmospheres, methane storms, and corrosive environmental conditions. These locations often harbor unique chemical processes that could revolutionize manufacturing techniques. The Rillian delegate's voice was barely audible when he asked, "Your species would volunteer for first contact missions with hostile civilizations?" Jiho's smile became even warmer. "We'd consider it an honor to serve the Confederation in that capacity. Humans have extensive experience with challenging negotiations, though I should clarify something important." He paused, and the silence in the chamber seemed to deepen even further. "Earth is actually quite mild by our standards for habitability." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Several aliens began double-checking their translation systems, certain they must have misunderstood. "We've already conducted preliminary surveys of Confederation space," Jiho continued, pulling up a new display that showed 17 worlds scattered across the galaxy. "These planets would make excellent human colonies. What your species consider lethal environmental conditions, we find refreshing." The 17 worlds on the display were among the most feared destinations in known space, planets that had claimed entire exploration fleets, worlds where the environment was so hostile that they were used as cautionary tales about the dangers of uncontrolled expansion. "My colleague Inho leads our xenobiology department," Jiho said with obvious pride. "He's particularly excited about studying life forms that exist in what you consider impossible conditions. He believes that organisms adapted to extreme environments might hold keys to biological advances that could benefit all species." A cargo-handling robot in the adjacent docking bay suddenly malfunctioned, its load-balancing systems apparently overwhelmed by the translation data streaming through the station's computer networks. The mechanical failure sent shipping containers tumbling across the bay floor with crashes that echoed through the station's corridors. "Our engineer Yunji has developed preliminary designs for space stations that could operate in environments where no current Confederation technology can function," Jiho continued, seemingly unaware of the mechanical chaos his words were causing. Throughout the station, Plasma storm regions, gravitational anomaly zones, areas of space-time distortion that have been considered permanently inaccessible. The Volek delegate's harmonic resonance had shifted to frequencies that her species associated with religious awe. How did your species develop civilization on such a hostile world? Jiho's expression became gentle, almost paternal. We didn't see it as hostile. We saw it as home. The simple statement carried more impact than all the technical specifications and demonstrations combined. It revealed something fundamental about humanity that the assembled delegates were only beginning to understand. They weren't survivors who had somehow escaped their world's hostility. They were beings who had embraced that hostility and made it part of themselves. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not a single delegate opposed humanity's full membership in the Confederation. The Chamber's automated systems recorded the decision with electronic precision, but the real transformation couldn't be captured in data files. Before Jiho had even powered down his presentation equipment, his personal communication device was chiming with incoming messages. 17 different species had submitted formal requests for human assistance with exploration and colonization projects that had been considered impossible for decades. The Zentari wanted human scouts for first contact missions in the Galactic Rim territories. The Volak requested human engineers for construction projects in radiation-soaked asteroid fields. The Rillian delegation asked for human researchers to investigate worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable centuries ago. Later, that evening, in his modest quarters aboard the station, Jiho compiled his report for transmission back to Earth. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic keyboard as he summarized the day's events for his government and the billions of humans who would soon learn that their species had just become the galaxy's go-to solution for impossible problems. Humanity's initial reputation as small, fragile beings has been successfully revised, he wrote with satisfaction. Current galactic perception has evolved to something closer to diplomatically inclined apex predators with a cheerful disposition about extreme challenges. He paused in his typing to look out through his quarters viewport at the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Somewhere out there were worlds that the galaxy's greatest civilizations feared to approach, worlds that would soon carry human footprints and the sound of human laughter as his species turned the impossible into the routine. The transformation was complete. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The end.